All right. We are going to bring in Marxist here. You are on the mic. And one thing I wanted to add too, really quick, what to add on to what CR said about the whole unity thing. Like to me, it was just like, what a waste. Like you guys had so much power here and to really make something happen and have your demands met and to just say in the interview, like, well, if Congress makes that decision, we'll just revisit 2 years from now. I'm like, no, like this would have never happened during like our grandparents' generation. Like, what if MLK said, oh, well, they told me we can't sit in this restaurant, so I guess we just fall back and we just scrap this and come back to. No way. Like, nothing would have ever been done. Like, we wouldn't have had a civil rights movement if they just gave up so easily. Like, this is crazy. What's going on, Marxist?
Hey, I'm Mark Sasak. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk. I love your show, Savvy. I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about. Earlier we were talking about China. I want to talk about China that a lot of people in the United States don't understand, and how it's relevant to the rail strikes. How it's relevant to strikes in general, especially mass general strikes. Is I wanted to talk about China's democratic system because a lot of our corporations here love to push into our faces every day that China is not democratic. China is not a free country. The government decides everything there, right? But there's something. The fact is that China is more democratic than we've ever been in the United States. China has a superior democratic system that is entirely different than the system that we have here in the United States, which is what I call a corporate democracy. Um, and
Mm.
yeah, were you gonna say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Danny, I'm not sure. Have you ever watched The Left Lens um, with
Danny
Danny
Haifong?
Haiphong? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Danny
I love. Yeah,
Haiphong. He came on a while back and he did a whole spiel on China. And he was saying similar thing to what you just said.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it also it ties into the strike movement, because it began as a strike movement. It's what is how the system began, and I mean, with China was kept in feudalism by colonialism up until 1949. So it was kind of a different form of strike. The strike, but the system that China picked up is what was the Soviet system in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet system began out of mass general strikes, particularly in 1905, which erased the autocracy, or not erase, or it didn't erase it, but it forced the czar to give into these compromises where he allowed a constituent assembly, allowed freedom to assemble, allowed like things that the czar didn't have. And then this system that developed out of after that is what picked up in China. And how it works is there's a level. So it starts at the council, or what was called the Soviet. It starts at the council. It's like it could be a workers' council, it could be a neighborhood, it could be like a farmers' cooperative, it could be a military barracks. It's been all of these things, and we don't have this level in our democracy here in the United States. And so that council, among everybody, elects a delegate to represent them to a upper level, or what is the local level. And so they have a council that's like a local council, right? And that would be like what we have here is the city hall or the county, the county quorum court. And then from there, that council elects somebody up to what is a regional council, which would be like the state level here, And then from there, that level elects somebody to the National Assembly, which would be like the federal level, here. And the National Assembly decides, decides everything at the national level, the state everything at the state level, the local everything at the local level, and they get to elect all the way up. And here's another thing about their system that we don't have in the United States, and it's the ability to recall a delegate at any time. Like say you and your council say, where you work at, say you work at a hospital, your council gets to say, I don't like how our delegate, keeps voting for this local representative we have here. Let's recall them. What do y'all think? Okay, yeah, recall them, and they can recall them at any time. They have open discussions and everything, and it sets democracy there at that level, and we don't have that. It's a here, if you notice city council meetings across the whole country, it's very like you'll see you across the whole country, you'll see so many people just like one after another rip into their city council, like people they voted for, just rip into them for just the whole time, one after another on Zoom. And the city council will still be like, all right, well, and then just vote build a $40 million police department in a town of 70,000 people where half the people live on wells. And everybody's just mad because they're very class antagonistic because, they even the city councils have to answer to who pay them. And that's the lobbyist system. That's what we live in, is the corporate democracy, And China did away with this, and people have a hard time understanding this in the United States because we just never see it. We never learn about it. Not a lot of people here speak Mandarin or even speak Russian to understand what the Soviet system was like. And it's a superior form of democracy because corporations, even capitalists outside of your country, can't corrupt that electoral system because there's so many councils that elect all the way up, that elect the whole way up. They can't. Whereas here, you have a vote every 2 to 4 years. The two parties pick out who's going to run for whatever position. You get to vote on all the positions, but the parties, bureaucratically, basically, they pick out who's going to run. You vote for one or the other, the corporation, and then the corporations lobby them. And if they can't lobby them, they're going to lobby everybody else in their party. And if they're just being too much of a problem, they're just going to, silence them the whole time and then get them out the next election around. And that's because that's a word called dictatorship. That's a corporate dictatorship. It's and it's what we're experiencing now in the strikes. It's what we are seeing say if we were to have a mass rail strike in December 9th, we will see two different dictatorships battle it out. These corporate rail companies, they're practicing their dictatorship when they go get Biden or whoever to say, yeah, let's make these people go back to work. They're using the state because they don't have the power, that the productive force that all those rail workers have. They have to go get their government. So the government is constantly opposed to the workers in this society. They're constantly opposed at each other's interests. The workers are constantly trying to get more for their labor, and the owner is trying to get more of their labor for less, right? And so it's because we're in a very old, organized form of society. It's a 250-year-old capitalist state, right? That started with the capitalist revolution and the American Revolution. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's just crazy that like it's 2022. If anything, we shouldn't have to fight for like workers' rights in 2022. America already had this fight. They already had this fight. They had the labor movement. I mean, come on, like they had like a lot of people pressured FDR. People bring up the New Deal a lot, and I always remind people it's not like he just did that on his own because he wanted to help the people. He was pressured. There was pressure put on him by the people, and so that's why he did those things. And when I tell people we need to do the same thing today, we need to put pressure on the politicians. People are like, "Oh no, we can't do that. We need to be nice to them." I'm like, "Be nice to them to what? They're not doing anything. They're not giving us anything. So why do we have to be nice to them?"
Yeah, it's the hegemony itself. Like what enforces these policies. That's like that weakens the unions or weakens the workers in general across the whole country. It's a physical thing. It's the physical. It's a physical coercion point that protects like production or ownership over production, ownership over property, and that's what the state essentially is. That's what the state actually is in itself, and So, but because that's a physical coercion point, if there's too much attrition against it, it wears down, and it has to comply, right? That's why they say politics and war are very similar. They're basically the same thing. What they say, war is just politics by different means. But politics is the more diplomatic version of war. But it's for this reason they have to have this hegemonic thing, and it kind of resembles I don't want to call it a cult, but it's like the way they're like, they see somebody else do it and they're like, oh, this has to be like a divine spirit telling us this about China and Russia and about how like we don't vote for Biden, we vote for Trump, and we have to get in our side. And then they're kind of just being drug around by what they see because their ideology is entirely dependent on their consciousness, like what they know, And so, in the same way that the state or corporations, this extra ownership over everybody's production, the same way that they basically liquidate out our state, they liquidate out our, democracy, they liquidate out our media as well. Somebody can work for Walmart, let's say 40 hours a week, and and then their productive value of their work, their actual value, is used to sponsor something in the media that is completely, contradictory to their interests. So they're working there, they're sitting there working every day more and more so that they can have, so that their political opposition grows. So what counters their actual interest grows more and more and counters them. It's because, and I tell people, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I tell people all the time that this is what a lot of people don't like. I don't think a lot of people do in the United States, and I know I didn't for a large part of my life. Was that when we look around at everything around everything around us, whether we're in a room or a city, everything there took a process, a time, an amount of time that somebody spent doing what it took for that to be there physically, right? It took of their finite life, a finite part of their or a part of their finite life to put it there. And if that doesn't happen, there is no society. Nothing develops. We don't have houses or computers or food or anything. That's kind of what strikes show, because in that whole process of it getting there, whether it was a machine that made it, whether somebody had to make the machine that made it, whether somebody had to make the machine that made the machine that made it, whether somebody had to drive a truck to get it there, it took all, it's like a physical democracy that actually exists, is the production process that continues our society. And, but nowhere in there is there any physical real need for this extra ownership over this whole process, this extra, this capitalist ownership. It's sometimes when I explain this to just anybody, I'll kind of avoid using that word, but here I could use the word capitalist. It's, because it's, capital is just a piece of paper that has no actual, it's not just pieces of paper that gets this around. What gives that capital, that the capital is just a note of a value that's only enforced by the state, So it's this extra dead weight of ownership over our society that is, that entirely relies on the government for its physical existence, But that's not the case with the people who work, and that's not the case with people who drive trains or drive trucks or nurses or, teachers or anybody who carries out what we need in our society, that they have what I like to call an inalienable dictatorship. They have an inalienable dictatorship over this government or any government. It's also, and this is what was realized in China too, by the way, that this is what Mao Zedong, would talk about, would teach Chinese peasants and stuff, is the dictatorship of the proletariat, It's proletariat meaning working class.
I hear you. Like, well said, Marxist. That definitely need to be said. I think that you're right. A lot of Americans do have the wrong impression of China and the government in China. And I mean, even myself, like I had to educate myself about what it really is and what's really happening. And I think there's a lot of like fear mongering about China here in the United States, by the way, and that's coming from the US government. And it happened under Trump too, not just under Biden. And I think that, I think that at some point, and I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but at some point, I really, really hope the American people, the working class and poor people in this country, one day just take a look in the mirror and just take a deep breath and look around and see how things have not improved in their lives and just say, you know what, screw this. Like, we're not doing this anymore. Like, imagine if everybody, like I said, the railroad workers, that obviously would be a big impact. That's why Joe Biden responded so quickly. That's why he jumped in. That's why he's asking Congress to jump in, because he knows it would have an effect on the economy. You don't see them stepping in to stop Starbucks from unionizing. You don't see them stepping in to stop that Amazon location from unionizing, because that's not really going to have a drastic effect on the U.S. economy. The railroad workers would. So would the truckers. So would the port workers. If you can't shut down the supply chain They're not going to really try to intervene because you're not a threat to the US economy as a whole. So in order for us to have a general strike in this country, you have to shut down the supply chain in some way, shape, or form, unless at least 3% of the population is willing to walk off their jobs. And most people aren't willing to do that. And it'll be hard to get to that 3% because people have to pay their bills and people have to provide a roof over their head. And so this is how they keep us, in so many words, a slave to the system. This is how they keep people constantly working. This is why people still have to work 2 and 3 jobs. Like, it's ridiculous that in this country, people have to work 2 jobs, but some people do, depending on where you live, depending on how much education you have, or depending on how much you're paid. There should have been some type of strike the same way there were millions of people that rose up across the country to protest about George Floyd. We should have had that same type of movement in reference to minimum wage in this country. How is it 2022 and minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour? This is absurd. This is insane. People can't live off of that. So it's just when we talk about economic things, like, people will come out for social issues. But one of the things I notice, if you try to get people to come out for economic issues, nobody want to budge. Why is that?
Well, yeah, I was, I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, there's no, Americans are being too civil. That when, like, or it's not like back in the day, like, but we have to consider we did just have the largest mass demonstration in U.S. history 2 years ago, and if you've noticed, nowhere in the media is talking about it. Nowhere, like, it's not, they don't even criticize it now. It's just they don't even mention. It's like it didn't even happen. And I think it is because this state knows that it cannot have this. I mean, these corporations, this corporate dictatorship knows that it cannot have that again. That if it has much more of those, it's going to have to, something's gonna fall apart for it, because everybody got to practice their, what I call practicing their dictatorship. All the people got to see what it was like to stand up to this. I guess it was like a small scrimmage to see what it was like. But it was everybody across the country. It went on all year, nearly, but it was like 350,000 people up to in Philadelphia at one point, but also all across the country in these small rural areas, like little bitty towns out here where there's like 2 exits to the highway or whatever. They would have, Black Lives Matter protests, and it kind of broke those areas in to be political in a way that they've never had before, And I think the state is absolutely terrified of that level of, I guess, political opposition reemerging. And it's specifically terrorized if it reemerges as a mass general strike, because that's what, that is what has led to the fall of capitalism and colonialism all throughout history. And I mean, at least in developed countries, particularly, or the countries that were more developed into capitalism. It was, and I think that's what they're absolutely terrified of. And so it's a different atmosphere now. They think more political now than they did before. And it was I think that and I think it's going to take like some theoretical leadership, and among the leaders that we have now, who can, who don't, who don't, it's going to take some theoretical leadership. That's one thing that I saw personally, as great as the protests were extremely important in 2020. It was often that the demands of the protests were oftentimes drowned out by Democrats being sent out into the community to say, stop saying defund the police. That loses people, who does it really lose? It loses their donors. That's what, because liberals cannot acknowledge class. That's not, it's people, it loses people, and specifically people with a lot of money who survive off prison labor, like defense contractors, that's what they meant by it loses people. But that was obvious. The most clear demand, I think, of those protests was to defund the police and to stop targeting Black people in the United States, and because we are the most incarcerated country in human history, and it's It's everybody. People in the United States have never been more in agreement ever in history that there's than they were in 2020, and the sentiment was that we, our police are extremely corrupt. They're extreme. Our police system is wrong. It's our police system is racist, and it's a it's standing in the way of everybody's I guess well-being. Like everybody sees this and knows that this is wrong. What's happening?
That's right.
I it's okay if one thing I notice about, particularly with George Floyd, I've often, like, a lot of people wonder why particularly were things so viral when George Floyd went around. Are you aware of George Floyd's music career he had?
Yeah, I interviewed his uncle, by the way. I interviewed
Oh,
his uncle last year. Yeah, so he told me a lot of things about George Floyd that mainstream media didn't mention. And I think that that video really went viral. And I think that was one of those examples where you couldn't really say, okay, well, were his hands up or down or anything, like you couldn't say that. There was no, well, maybe he did this, maybe he did. There was none of that. You couldn't say that after watching that video. It was very clear cut. And that's part of it. Why it trended the way that it did, and it went international as well. Like I said, like there were people protesting in South Korea, like all over the world, about George Floyd. And it's just really sad that after all of those protests, the demand of defunding the police did not happen, because again, the Democratic Party got a hold of that. Nancy Pelosi and Jim Clyburn and the rest of those goofs kneeling in kente cloth, looking like a damn fool. They got a hold of that. Black Lives Matter sold out. Not necessarily the activists per se, but the organization sold out to corporate interest. And so there went that. And then also, right after Joe Biden won, most of those protesters went home. So Chuck Modi, he actually captured a lot of that on video. And he said the same thing. It was just like the moment it was announced that Joe Biden won, the protesters were like, okay, well, we're done here. So most of them went home. And there were still some people protesting in DC and Portland, Oregon. But after Joe Biden won, the media stopped covering it. And so that was another problem with it. People should have continued protesting as if because Trump was gone, okay, all of a sudden we don't have to deal with police brutality. No. Where were all those same people last year with all the police brutality events we had last year and this year, which most of them did not get anywhere near as much attention as the George Floyd murder? But that they were silent. They were nowhere to be found. But the real activists, like the real ones who are out there, like the ride or die people, they were still protesting about Amir Locke. People were protesting about Jalen McMillan. That one was recent. But all the others, they're nowhere to be found.
yeah. Before I get off, thank you for having me on. I wanted to point out something about, that I think leftist organizing, and that, there's socialist organizing, communist organizing, labor organizing needs to, I could learn from 2020. And it is the fact that, it's what went so viral about George Floyd to where things picked up, because what a difference was with George Floyd's, music group is the Screwed Up Clique, like probably the most famous group out of Houston, was that Screwed Up Clique didn't have these conditions for them to make contact with people when they toured, I have a friend who has like original Screwed Up tapes that he got from his cousin who got him at a SWAT meet from somebody from Screwed Up Clique. And they went around and organically promoted their music everywhere they could. They never stopped and said, well, what ideology is this person? Is this person left wing? Is this person right wing? If they were just doing music, and if they would perform where they could. So all these people had these personal stories with Screwed Up Clique, and also with George Floyd. They would, and that shared all over the country into this population that locally all had their own police incidences that got covered up by the corporate media. They got suppressed out, but they didn't let ideology, hold them back before they say sold a CD or did a show or got in contact with somebody. And I think that might have something to do with the mass scale of what that was so many people personally knew him and had personal stories with George Floyd. I think when we kind of circle ourselves in instead of elevating, consciousness where we can and elevating political consciousness or even getting people involved. And, in the Southeast, it's very, I live in Arkansas. It's it's very apolitical. That's George Floyd was from Houston. It's very apolitical. So it's like politics wasn't always necessarily the thing that spread music, right? Like it's definitely not what spreads music down here. But being able to contact, but even something that wasn't a political movement, when it couldn't avoid what politics is. It's the struggle, the class struggle itself, the struggle itself. I mean, it would be that eventually, you don't have to be political to see what the police are doing in this country is absolutely wrong, and that whoever is controlling our police does not have anybody's best interest at hand, and they're racist. That's that's something I think that I think leftist organizations should look at is what it was that made George Floyd go viral, and that it wasn't the Screwed Up Clique wasn't a circle that hung around themselves and thought about how good they rapped, and how they were the best rappers. They went out they had to go out to the people and make contact with people and show them their music and let them hear it at car shows and let them see for themselves their music. It's something I think that we have to do with our struggle. We have to show people our struggle, the science of it, and the people will do the rest for us, I guess.
Well
we
said.
have to organize them. Yeah.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for calling in, Marxist. I'm going to go to the next caller.